WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. It is baseball season. I'm clearing out all of my Ravens stuff here and getting Brian Billick. I think we're actually going to get a Terps Sporticulture magma lamp. So I might have a red magma lamp in here for the next month if Court gets that over to me from Sporticulture. Big thanks to Pizza John's as well as Liberty Pure. I'm wearing the hat. And our friends at Raskin Global and Leonard Raskin. Baseball season, Luke Jones. I got to get some Oriole magic in here. I tried watching. Excuse me. Not easy to do on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, I hear you. It's certainly, you have to be very selective in what you're looking for. It's not terribly different from last year in that way. I think.
Or the year before that, by the way, yes. Yeah.
Right, well, the year before that.
They had Machado, yes.
The year before that, you thought they were still trying to be good.
It only feels like they're 3 years into the rebuild. They're only two.
They're really, last year was kind of the survey the inventory, survey the rubble. What do you have in the system already that you like or you think you can develop? Can they have a couple more John Means kind of stories this year? I think that's plausible. No one at this point last year thought John Means was going to be on the 25-man roster, let alone being a guy that made the All-Star team and got Rookie of the Year votes.
I'm calling him the Jeff Ballard of the modern era.
Yeah, and
for those of you who still appreciate Jeff Ballard 30 years later, I love you guys. That's all I'm saying. I don't know who the audience is when I say Jeff Ballard. My wife says who?
Exactly.
Exactly.
People will say, why not, right?
Why
exactly.
not? Absolutely.
But as much as the Astros story has been tainted and carries very different connotations, once upon a time, Dallas Keuchel was not much of a prospect for the Astros, and he had that growth mindset, and John Means, I don't know if he's going to be Dallas Keuchel, but for 1 year anyway, it was a nice story. So you're looking for some of those, and some of those stories are not going to become apparent until the season starts. But I think where this season does carry a little more intrigue, if you're looking for reasons to be intrigued, is the possibility of Ryan Mountcastle being called up at some point this year, which is going to happen. It's just a matter of when. They're still trying to figure out a position for him, whether it's going to be left field, whether it's going to be DH, whether it's going to be first base. That's still to be determined for him. I think you look at someone like Keegan Aiken, who didn't have a great statistical season at AAA last year, but when you look at how that league's profile was, had an okay season, and he's someone who looks to be close to ready to dip his toes into the major league waters. Now, is he going to come north with the club? Probably not, but there's certainly an opportunity because you go beyond John Means and assuming a healthy Alex Cobb and maybe an Asher Wojciechowski, the rest of the rotation's wide open. Who knows?
There's nothing else you pick up from spending 2.5 hours with Scott Garceau and Ben McDonald other than they don't know much more about the team than I do. That there's plenty of opportunity on a 54 and 108, kind of team. That if you go down the spring and you show that you can hit major league pitching or get major league batters out or even field like a major league player and do one of the other two pretty well, you can run a little, you're a gamer, you're into their stats, you're showing a growth mindset. This would be the time that every single at-bat doesn't mean much to you and me, right? It's kind of like preseason football, right?
Sure.
Like the third quarter of the second preseason game or whatever. But for the people in the cage doing this and the people we've never heard of, I threw out my Sergio Robles, Drungo Hayeswood, Chico Simone references because when I look down, Luke, I put out on my social media, and look, you're a little different, you know what I mean? Like when it comes to the Orioles, I put out I'll give you Trey Mancini, start naming Orioles. And people on my timeline who know who Jeff Ballard is have had a very hard time counting to 3 or 4. That's how incredibly anonymous these cats are.
Yeah, hey, I'm not going to argue with you on that. I know more, but hey, if you ask me right now to rattle off the 40-man roster, I would struggle.
I bet if Jose Iglesias walked up to you, you wouldn't know who he is.
I know who he is because he's actually someone who's been in the league. He's actually been a real player. But
he's your age.
That was one of the things that was so striking to me last year when they had a workout at the ballpark before they went to Yankee Stadium for opening day. And it was so almost bizarre to me. And that's fully acknowledging that 2018, let's face it, the roster went through a lot of in-season change. So their 25-man in September, or I guess 40-man if you want to be technical, in September compared to what it was on opening day 2018 was drastically different. But I remember that workout a couple days before the opener in the Bronx last year, and these guys were all wearing sweatshirts because, it was late March. It was cold at Camden Yards. And how few of them that I really recognized. And
who's that guy? Who's that guy? My
just,
wife did that all last year until such point where they're 9-21 and it's like May 14th, and you're like, all right, man. Like,
the novelty wears off. I get it. But hey, I'm not saying I enjoy a rebuild by any means. Just because I immerse myself in it a little bit more.
I'd love to tell you a lot about John Means, but I'm not going to lie to you. I wasn't paying a lot of attention in July and August. Neither was anybody else. So.
I understand that.
And I guess that they're resigned to that happening, which is why they run such a lousy organization and the games aren't on TV. But when they were in first place, the games weren't on TV in Sarasota. So, trying to figure out who Hanser Alberto is, part of that is put him on the television in the middle of the afternoon on a Wednesday in March, and you might get my attention enough to say, well, I got tickets for bobblehead night. I at least want to know who Austin Hayes is, or whatever. Any of these guys, I'm just reading their names because they're all familiar to me. But if Anthony Santander, no matter how you pronounce his name, were to walk up to me, I know he's Venezuelan, but I don't know much more about him than that.
Yeah, and that's fair. And it's funny.
Chance Cisco wasn't around signing autographs in the off season, or I barely can remember the name of the manager last week. I was on with Dennis, and it took me a minute to get to Brendan Hyde. You know what I mean? To say, all right, Brandon Hyde, where has he been hiding the last 4 months? Why have I not met him? Why has he not been hanging out? I don't know. They don't know what they're doing, which really, TJ Brightman's running the place, man. I am gravely concerned about the future of the Orioles. I'm going to talk about that a lot because, you know who Cedric Mullins is, but the rest of the world has a long way to go.
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of it's going to be a moot point if this rebuild doesn't work. That's just the truth. And look, I've talked to you a lot over the last couple of years as far as marketing and promotions and putting your tickets on sale earlier and things of that nature. And I'm not someone who has any real experience in that sector, so I'm not sitting here trying to pretend I'm an expert.
It's all I've ever done. So it's the reason you're sitting here is because I'm good at it.
but you don't have to. You don't have to have that kind of background to understand that typically it's a bad practice to not put your individual game tickets on sale till March, which we've seen in the past. So those factors are certainly concerns. Those factors are topical. Those factors are very real for an organization that understands that they're not selling anything other than hope on the baseball side right now, and that hope is much more down the road, not in 2020. People know you're not going to see Adley Rutschman playing at Camden Yards this summer.
Could they really be worse this year? I'm not being mean. I had some expectation that they're not going to lose 100 games this year. Yeah. And I don't even, listen, 98 or 108, to your point, once you start 9-21, it just doesn't matter, how the last 40 games work out that you happen to play 500 ball after August 20th to get yourself to 97 losses. I have no thought they can be competitive, right? I haven't heard of most of these guys. It feels like Garceau's already bored with it. Literally, the broadcasts aren't very good. I kind of put the broadcast on Sunday. Literally, I put that goofy wall-to-wall baseball on with Tom Davis and the same 10 sponsors he's had. Hi, Pete Cycle. Good to see you. And I wanted to, learn about the players. And then I'm like, well, the game's coming on. And then when it's Garceau and McDonald, I'm like, they're not going to teach me about the players. You know more about the players than they know. if I'm putting it on at this point and I'm giving it my Sunday afternoon, and I don't really know why I'm doing it other than I like orange and black and my last name's Aparicio and I do sports, there's a part of this that really needs to be strategic in regard to making me know something about the players and we're really wanting to care and having it not be so damn sleepy. And all of that baked into it, it's just so terrible, Luke. You know, I mean, I'm just being honest. Like, I put it on and I'm like, oh, here we go again, and it's February, and you're going to sit here and tell me, yeah, they're probably going to lose 104 again. Like, right? I mean, like, is there any hope at all?
But you knew that. I mean, you were just like everyone else.
I'm facing the reality of it again now that they're back on television. You haven't thought about them a whole lot.
I'll say this. Ben McDonald's really good at it. Now, was Sunday the best example of that? I'm not going to sit here.
I love Ben, so you know.
He is very good at it. They have, Jim Palmer, even in his advancing age and wondering how much longer he's going to do it, he's still among the best in baseball at this when you talk about local broadcasts. Because with MLB Network now, you get a chance to hear these local broadcasts in other markets. And I'll take those two guys individually up against just about anyone that individual team broadcasts offer. But that said, it's a challenging endeavor, especially when you look at this camp. I mean, the Orioles, just the sheer volume of players they have in Major League camp right now. And they'll start to trim the roster over the next couple of weeks, and they'll get down to having 45, 40 guys in camp, that type of thing. But right now, there's a lot of fodder. There are a lot of spare parts and placeholders. So even for someone who's covering the team, there is that sense of how much do I get invested in building a relationship with player A or talking to player B.
Do I really need to know Rio Ruiz?
Understanding, are they going to be here even next year, let alone where they are 3 or 4 years from now. So there is the challenge to that. But I think that's where you kind of do go down the 40-man roster and you identify the guys that have a chance to be here in the next few years and have a chance to be part of the next contender. I mean, two guys that I'm really looking forward to watching big time in 2020 are Austin Hayes and Hunter Harvey. We saw these guys at the very end of last year. They both flashed more than a few times. And, I mean, Hunter Harvey, probably not going to be their closer this year, but he's the kind of guy that he has the stuff, and we've heard this name for years, and he couldn't stay healthy, so now he's finally in a relief role. He's still pretty young. He's not going to be a number one starter like you hoped he might be 5 years ago, but he's someone who has a chance to be a really important part of their bullpen. And he's 25 years old, so it's not as though he's, approaching being over the hill or anything like that. And Austin Hayes, who was called up in September, really by almost just a rule change. He was going to go to the Arizona Fall League, and they had made a change because of the timing of when the Fall League was starting that he could both be called up to Baltimore and still play in the Fall League. And he ended up coming up and playing really good defense in center field and hitting. And look, it's September baseball. I'm not saying Austin Hayes is going to be a 20 home run, 20 stolen base, 80 RBI, 350 on base percentage guy. I don't know. We'll see how he handles it. But he's a guy that they've been excited about the last couple of years. He's been going back to the previous regime, and health had been a concern for him. But he's healthy, and he looks like he's going to be the opening day center fielder. So those are two guys who, unlike, as much as I think Hanser Alberto was a fun story last year, as much as I look at some other guys and say, well, Dwight Smith was, had a good
Hanser Alberto, at least we get a good name out of it, all right? It's better than another Mike Smith or Texas or a Mississippi around here, right?
Right. But you understand that most of those guys, even a John Means, his role for the 2023 Orioles, he might be the swingman out of the bullpen for all I know. I mean, you just don't know. But when you look at Hayes, you look at Hunter Harvey, you look at the possibilities, or not even possibility, I think more inevitability, assuming they're healthy, that you see a Keegan Aiken called up to be part of this rotation later on by summer, I would think, if he doesn't come north with the camp or at the end of camp.
Well, I mean, that's one thing about the organization. Like Norfolk's worth watching, and going down to Delmarva. I mean, there is that part of it. And you and I always say we're going to go do that. Maybe this is the summer I throw you and Alan in the back seat, and we go for a trip somewhere, go down to Bowie or so. I don't know, but you and I flew over the Norfolk Stadium on the way to Miami, and the great Gary Kendall will be down in Norfolk seeing some of these guys. So, yeah, I mean, I look down the list here, and I see names like Dean Kramer and some of these names that were part of deals a couple of years ago when we were dealing guys off, that you're at least like, well, I know that guy's name, kind of like a fifth-round Ravens draft pick, right?
Yeah, basically. I mean, Dean Kramer, I didn't mention him, but he's someone that I'm really excited about in the short term. And when I say really excited, meaning I think he has a chance that he could be a major league starting pitcher and be a guy that probably back half of the rotation. I think for the upside to think of a guy that could be a future ace or a number two, you're talking about D.L. Hall and Grayson Rodriguez, who are still a couple years away. I mean, those are younger guys. I mean, D.L. Hall was at Frederick, and Grayson Rodriguez was at Delmarva last year. So that's not to say they can't progress quickly, but again, they're not going to be 2020 Orioles. But if you're talking about guys who have a chance to be 2020 Orioles, there is a Keegan Aiken who probably fits into the rotation, at least part of having an opportunity to be in the rotation at some point this year. Dean Kramer needs a little more seasoning at AAA, but he's a guy that if he pitches really well over the first 3 or 4 months of the season, then he could be in line for an opportunity later on this season. So you're starting to see kind of the first line of guys, and they're not elite prospects. They're not Adley Rutschman-type prospects, but they're guys who I'm more interested in than, for lack of a better term, the placeholders that we've seen over the last calendar year, the placeholders that we saw last year and that we're going to see again this year. So I understand that's not a sell job. That's people are listening and saying, whoa, boy, I can't wait to tune in every single night and watch. But if you are willing to even just follow it from afar, just looking at the pitching probables and taking a look at what is happening at Norfolk and what is happening at Bowie and Frederick, then you can see progress. And even last year, go look and look at how the minor league teams fared. Look at how they did on the pitching side, which is really where the advancements from a development standpoint, that's really where they're ahead of the game. And that's kind of been the deal with baseball in general. The pitching is where you've really seen the advancements over the last few years around the game, with spin rate and these high-speed, high-definition cameras that can see a release point and your grip and allows you to repeat your delivery so much more. The hitting is trying to catch up, and that's not to say they're not making strides there, and they don't have technology there, but on the pitching side is where you definitely saw some gains in the Orioles system. Again, how quickly does that manifest itself in Baltimore? It's probably not 2020. It's probably not 2021, but if you start to see a few of these guys start to break through and they have some success and you're not in a position where you're claiming every guy off the waiver wire to try to make a start for you because your staff is just completely scorched earth by June, and Stevie Wilkerson and guys like that are having to finish games for you because you don't even have a functional pitching staff. You start to... You
mean last year's issues?
Yeah, last year and probably this year. I mean, I hope they can be a little more functional than they were last year. They're still going to be bad, believe me, but can they be a little more functional? And that's probably why you see a couple guys like Wade LeBlanc, Tommy Malone. They're non-roster invitees. They're 30-somethings that have been in Major League Baseball. They're not great pitchers by any means. They've never been great pitchers. But are they guys that can give you 5 innings at least more consistently than some of the guys they had last year? And, if they post 5 ERAs, but they're not completely destroying your bullpen every 5 days, then I hesitate to say that's progress, but it's a little more ideal than what we saw last year. So there's still going to be way more of that, but if you're willing to look for it, there's still some bright spots that you could start to see in 2020, whether it's a Keegan Aiken, whether it's a Dean Kramer later on in the season, whether it's Hunter Harvey nailing down a back end of the bullpen spot, whether it's Ryan Mountcastle getting the call and hitting like he's hit at every level of professional baseball, and trying to figure out where he's going to be defensively. So there's the potential for some of those storylines, whereas last year, we talked about it, one of the things that made it, the losing's one thing, but when the guys that are doing the losing aren't guys that you really feel have a chance to be part of it, then there's just not that intrigue. In the same way that when you, or in a different way that you looked at the 2009, 2010, 2011 Orioles, where those were bad teams, but you had a Matt Wieters, you had an Adam Jones, you had a Nick Markakis on the roster, you had pieces that were in Baltimore at that point that you thought, oh, these guys could be part of a winning team.
Well, and the other thing is these guys have no heart about dealing guys off. I mean, if you go back to the Astros' history about how they would really feel about Trey Mancini or John Means, they would feel much better about renting off 3 21-year-old prospects and dealing those guys off and not having to fight arbitration while they lose 92 next year and 89 the year after that, or whatever their trajectory would be to getting better. I don't think they envision a 2024 roster with John Means as a 20-game winner. I don't, and then paying him $14 million. I don't envision that.
Yeah, and that's why, as much as I love Trey Mancini, and I don't think that they should give him away by any stretch of the imagination, and I think there is a very sound argument, considering what he is as a player, to say that he's more valuable to the Orioles than other teams. But all those factors, all of those acknowledgments aside, he's absolutely someone that if the right deal comes along, I think you pull the trigger and you have to make that deal. And as much as that stinks for right now, I think that's just the reality of where they are, and that is where there is a lack of emotion in what Mike Elias is trying to do, and you need some of that. You have to have some of that. You can't be sentimental about guys that have been part of 100-plus lost teams the last couple of years. I mean, that's just the truth. I like Trey Mancini a lot. I think he's a great character. I think he's a really good player. I think he's the kind of guy who there is sincerity when he says he wants to stick around and be part of the next contender here. I think Trey Mancini believes that. I think he wants that. I think he wants to win, but I think he wants to win in Baltimore. But realistically speaking, you also understand where he is at this point in his career, what his age is, and where he's going to be a 30-something by the time the Orioles are ideally competitive again. Even the best-case scenario, he's going to be 28 next month already. I mean, he's not a young guy in terms of rebuilding, how that goes. So that's where there is still some sense. And to go back to your question that you posed a few minutes ago, yes, it could be a little worse this year than it was last year. Not saying that's likely, because you're still dealing with a lot of variance in a baseball season, and you could still have a pretty darn bad team not be as bad as they were the year before. We talked about this last spring. You asked me if the Orioles could be worse than the 115-loss outfit they were in 2018.
Outfit.
Yeah, and I said no, even though I think their talent level is probably inferior, but I just think the sheer probability of losing that many games is just, it's not incredibly high. There's so much luck, there's so much day-to-day variance in baseball that you can have teams that, I mean, we've seen it. We've seen playoff teams that have run differentials that are negative, that teams that have allowed more runs than they've scored, and they somehow figure out a way to win 91 games, and they're in the postseason. I mean, that happens. That doesn't happen every year, but that happens in baseball. So while I think the Orioles could be a few games better than they were last year, they also, they could be a few games worse. And strictly speaking from a talent level, well, you look at their rotation, you take Dylan Bundy out of there, who wasn't a great pitcher and never lived up to the hype of what he once was, but he was still a guy that gave you 160 innings or whatever it was he gave them last year. When you take out a Jonathan Villar, who obviously wasn't going to be part of their future, but was still one of their best players, then, well, you got to make up for that somewhere. Now, Jose Iglesias could factor in there, certainly, and he's going to defend much better than he's a better defender than Jonathan Villar was when he played shortstop. so that's great, but you're still talking about a team that was bad last year and lost a couple guys that were positive contributors for them. So, yeah, it could be worse than it was last year, but again, when you try to look for the positives, if you're wanting to see a couple positives, it's that some of those prospects that were at the AAA level last year, at the AA level last year, there's a chance you could see them in Baltimore. And I mentioned some of the other guys, but let's see. I think this is a huge year for Yusniel Diaz, who was the centerpiece of the Machado trade. It's not as though he hasn't performed, but he hasn't been able to stay on the field. He's had hamstrings and quad issues, and he's had injury issues. And
it is hilarious. All these guys are all Duquette-era guys, right? And it feels like Duquette's been gone 10 years, and these were his decisions and his guys.
Sure. That's why. And look, that's not to say Diaz still can't be an Oriole and be a big part of their future, but he's been at AA the last couple of years, and he's had issues staying healthy. So I assume we see him move up to AAA. And if he rakes at Norfolk for 3 or 4 months, then sure, you could see him later this summer. But he's a guy that he needs to stay on the field. He's kind of where Austin Hayes has been the last couple of years, where you see the potential and you see even production when they're able to be in the lineup every day. But hey, you can't make the club in the tub, as they always talk about in football. That applies for a couple of these guys, and I think when you're talking about guys that can help speed up this process, not to say that it's coming anytime soon, but if some of these guys that are at the higher levels of the minor leagues, if they can stay on the field and make the progress and get to Baltimore this year, then okay. It might still mean 95 losses next year, but it's a more interesting 95-loss team because, hey, you can identify players A, B, C, D, E who look like they have a chance to actually be guys that are here for the next 5-6 years and guys that have a chance to be on the next contender instead of just having this roster roulette, claiming guys, minor league signings. And, look, it's fine that Elias is doing that. I'm not even criticizing that, but it's much harder, much more difficult as a fan to get invested in watching the 2020 club because you just know how few of those guys really have any kind of even a small chance to be part of the next contender.
Huey Lewis in the News once wrote a song, Bad is Bad, and I'm sure it'll be bad. Hey, dude, they're on TV on Wednesday. I'm looking. It's really hard to figure out when they're on TV. I've been Googling it. It took me 5 minutes to Google it and go around a little bit. And actually, on their schedule, when you click over it, it says whether it's on 105.7 The Scam or whether it's on MASN. Wednesday, it's Brooks Robinson Bobblehead Day in Sarasota. It's actually on. And by the way, they're giving away Birdland Hawaiian shirts on Saturday down in Sarasota. So for all the early birds to get down there and watch February baseball, you get bad baseball, and the click-throughs don't work on their website either, which really kind of stinks. But I'm actually trying to get to the March schedule to see what the bobbleheads they're giving away next month, and all I'm getting is a flash drive. So fixorioles.com over there, TJ. Luke Jones can be found. Luke at WNST.net. He's also Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. He will be doing some Ravens stuff. Obviously, the Ravens out in Indianapolis this week doing all things Combine. We have happily skipped Indianapolis this week. Skipping Sarasota as well. But we're not skipping the Terps. We're going to be down at the Terps game on Saturday. Michigan State in on a Saturday night. Still a top 10 team. And, better days ahead. Baltimore Positive ahead. Sheila Dixon joining us in 2 weeks, along with all of the other mayor candidates. You can find them all at Baltimore Positive. Big thanks to Raskin Global, our sponsor, as well as Liberty Pure. Spent some time with Doug Workman as well as Matt Stover. You can find that out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. Also had some Western fries from Royal Farms this weekend while I watched the Terps lose to Ohio State. I'm not going to blame that on Royal Farms, but I did have Western fries and some chicken. I had a chicken box. I went to the one on Light Street. You know you can get a biscuit at Royal Farms? They do biscuits there. I did that with some blueberry jam. It was delicious. Brought that home. Stop by Royal Farms, get the chicken, gas up, get some coffee, Kona blend, of course. Big thanks to all of our sponsors out there. The morning newspaper still delivers each and every morning to your email inbox, all brought to you by our friends at Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's always $5 down, $10 a month, getting you in the best shape as we sort of skipped winter around here. And don't forget our WNST tech service. Dennis Colazzos here on Thursday, driving you home from 3 until 5. It is the Dennis Colazzos Show. And, of course, our tech service with any breaking news. You get that first. Luke does the greatest job in the marketplace with that. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.